I am Graham, a trucker who reads a lot of books. My goal is to be a full-time author and illustrator. You're helping me get there by watching this video, so thanks. Now on to the video. Okay, we get to wrap up the October country. We've got the final three stories here, numbers 14 through 16. The first one is called The Wind. It's about two friends named Alan and Herb. Alan was in the war, unspecified war, but he was up in the Himalayas, and he's this kind of, not like crotchety, but he's just like the slightly weird old veteran farm neighbor who tells you stories about things that he saw in the war. And you just kind of listen to him and like, okay, that's nice, Alan. A little bit weird, but whatever, and shrug it off. Well, one thing that he's told his neighbor Herb, who lives a couple of miles away because this is open farm country, he tells Herb, he's like, hey, while I was in the Himalayas, I found the valley that is like the secret source of the wind. It's like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, it's like the source of the wind, all wind everywhere. The wind is sentient and awake, and I know where it comes from, and it doesn't like that about me. And I think it's coming to get me after all these years. Herb's like, okay, whatever, Alan, you're kind of crazy. Well, then one night, Herb keeps getting phone calls from Alan saying like, oh, the wind is coming to get me. And like every few minutes or every so often, Alan will call him and check in. And like Herb is too nice to tell him outright to piss off, but he's like, this is just weird, dude. Well, then finally, the calls stop coming, and Herb starts to worry. And then he starts calling Alan, and he can't get through, and he calls the operator, and the operator's like, yeah, we're having a hard time reaching houses in that area because there's this massive tornado, like there's this massive windstorm. And Herb's like, oh crap, and he suddenly hears Alan outside his door, and he's like, oh, Alan just came here, that's why he's not answering his phone. And he opens his door, and there's just like wind outside, and he hears Alan's voice on the wind, and then that's it. It's like, okay, cool, like this is a really functional short story right here, because it pitches you something out there, and it gives you no reason to believe it. It's just, here's this character, he's being a little bit weird, but fine. And then it doesn't, it's not necessarily that it leaves you with ambiguity, but it leaves you with the surprise. And plenty of these stories have had the surprise at the end. It's even a little bit like an old R.L. Stine Goosebumps story where like at the end, it's like, oh crap, big old plot twist that shows up. Like that's a satisfying genre staple to leave you in a state of wonder. Like, oh, he was telling the truth. I wonder what that must have been like. I think that's an example of a successful short story in general, and it used the right components to tell it in this genre. The next story, number 15, is called The Man Upstairs. This is another one that, like, this is just weird. Like, you put it down, and you just ask, like, you want to ask Ray Bradbury, like, dude, what is wrong with you? So back in the day, there were people called boarders who they just traveled around constantly for whatever reason. They would stay in a place for a little while. They would board up, and they would pay rent to whoever the landlord was, and you'd figure that some of that was they'd help out with chores or what have you. I remember a couple of years ago when I was doing some family history work, we were looking at old census sheets, and in the 1930s, or maybe it was the 1920s, one of my Bradley ancestors in West Virginia, it listed like everybody who was in the household, mom, dad, and all the siblings. And then there was one name that I'd never seen in the family tree before. It was Mac Tabor. Like, oh, that's weird. Never seen any Tabors in there. And in this column where it lists the relation, like, you know, husband, wife, brother, daughter, sister, whatever, it looked like it listed him as brother, but I sent it to my older brother. He's like, can you confirm this? And he goes, no, that says border. That's why the name is different. He was a guy who was just living with them. That was a regular thing. So all that's a roundabout way of explaining that this is set in a time when borders were more common. And it was a way for people without a house to have a place to stay wherever they went, and for people with an extra room to make a few extra bucks. But the situation could go weird or sour, and such was the case with this character here. So there's a little boy named Doug, and he lives with his grandma or visits his grandma, and he's just going off about how good she is at killing and dressing chickens. Dressing being pulling all the guts out, saving the organs for other purposes, and making a good stuffed mean chicken. And then he gets this, or then Grandma gets this boarder that comes and stays at her place, and Doug gets it in his head that he wants to do to this boarder what was done to the chickens. So he does, and it's weird and it's creepy as heck. And also, like on top of that, it doesn't kill the boarder the way that it would with, I don't know, a normal human being until something else happens. This is, yeah, it's just one of those stories where it's like I can't even imagine what you were writing about or why. This is just weird. So that's The Man Upstairs. Um, pass. That said, the final story, which is called There Was an Old Woman, I thought this was a great note to end this collection on, because so many of the stories before this, like I emphasized in the other videos, they are about people who focused too heavily and too greedily on something negative to the point where they were putting so much faith in it that it became manifest, and then it came to attack them. Like the woman who went to the pseudo mausoleum in Mexico, she was worried she would end up like a mummy, and then she died and ended up in Mexico. Or the guy who in Skeleton, who was worried about his bones inside him, and at the end, like he was able to get his skeleton out of his body. Very, very weird. There were a couple of those. This one is like that, but in the other direction. Instead of focusing on the macabre and the grotesque and the wicked and all that stuff, it goes in the other direction. So there's the main character. Her name is Aunt Tildy, and her whole thing is that she thinks that you can beat death if you just don't believe in death. I don't believe I'm going to die. I'm going to live forever. I got all this stuff to do, and so she's going to beat death. Well, then one day, like, death comes to pay her a visit, and he's all like Henry Cavill looking, Benedict Cumberbatch looking, like trying to woo her. He's like, "Hey, come over here to the dark side. I'm going to show you the path that rocks." And she says, "No, no, no." And then he's like, "Well, I got to take your soul." She's like, "No, you can't have my soul." And he goes, "Well, if I can't take your soul, I'm going to take your body." And she's like, "Yeah, whatever." Well, she wakes up the next day, and like her body is gone, and she's just a ghost. And she's so pissed off that she goes to the local morgue, and she's able to like show herself to the morticians and put herself back in her body and get her body back, because she has so much to live for. And she, again, like extra reaffirms that if I don't believe in death, he can't bother me, he can't hurt me. I was like, that's a really cool exploration of this idea from another angle, where instead of like me being so afraid of something and then it happens to me, it's like me being so against something that even when it does happen to me, I'm going to say up yours and not fall for it. And she succeeds. Just a crazy story, and one that works really, really well for this anthology, I think, and it's especially as a send-off note. So those are my thoughts on the October Country. If you've read these, let me know what your favorite story is. Thank you for watching that. To help the channel, check out my books on Amazon. Buy one, read it, tell me what you think. For October, I recommend Sleepless Hollow, a fantastic sci-fi romp with guns, ghosts, and gonzo action sequences. You can also subscribe to my Substack, where I do more detailed book reviews and longer-running projects, some of which is paywalled. Drive safe. See you out there.